Welcome to today's video. In this one, we've got another recap of the iPad M4 Pro. Now, I have had this iPad for about 3 months, and I think it's time to do a little bit of a long-term review and check-in and share my thoughts on if this iPad is actually worth it for people in a creative profession, or if you're a content creator and you're thinking about getting an iPad for a more run and gun editing workflow setup. So with that, let's jump on into it. The first reason I absolutely love this iPad is because it is extremely portable. Now, the iPad that I have is a nano textured glass variant. And so it was my way of being able to cut reflections on the fly and having a portable editing solution for if I was doing creative work. And there is slightly sort of muted tones compared to when I put it on a MacBook Pro. So no matter what, I can't use it as the be all end all solution unless I really get good at understanding how dim and muted some of the colors actually get. It always has to be double checked on a MacBook Pro before I send off photos or videos for client review, or I know I can be happy with it on an iPhone if it's like on Instagram or social media or whatever it's going to go. And so in of itself, I'm going to say it's doing a great job. We can get into the nitty grittiness of sort of the editing process in the next section, but as a portable workstation, it's phenomenal. And it has great workflow integration with all of my other Apple devices. Not only does the iPad for content creators work in a way where you can just transfer files around, but even with Adobe, having a photo uploaded into Lightroom on my MacBook Pro that then just works through the Adobe cloud to then put on the iPad, allowing me to edit using my Apple Pencil and just writing and drawing whatever I want, has been a game changer for me, being able to just sort of have that capability. The second reason I've been a fan of this is because of how usable and practical it actually is. The battery life is great, although if you're video editing or photo editing, it does drain a little bit quicker than I'd hope. If you're doing standard workflows, you're gonna have absolutely no complaints. And then of course, when you pair it with something like the portable keyboard, which just opens up and is so easy to integrate with a magnet on the back, you have a perfect way to bring your iPad Pro with you, reducing weight, and then allowing you to just have a mobile desktop wherever you go. And then the third thing is that there are a ton of apps that work natively on the iPad now. Before, Lightroom didn't actually have a native app. Now they do, and it works awesome. The only drawback is still those remaining apps that you're gonna see some limited functionality of. All right, and so with that, let's jump into actually editing on the iPad. If it's so great to edit with, what's the actual experience look like? Because the question you're probably wondering is the iPad M4 Pro actually good enough to edit your content on? Well, here are my honest thoughts. The first thing we need to talk about is the new upgraded Pencil. This is something that I think every content creator needs to think about, is how they want to integrate the Apple Pencil into their workflow. I think it's absolutely great. It's added so much to how I edit, whether it's in video or photo, when I'm making my content for social media. And even when I'm making notes, I think that the Apple Pencil really levels up what's possible for sort of like letting your thoughts out a lot easier than in previous variations of just sort of like a stylus on a screen. It really does bring like a real writing experience on the tablet. Given that it has like haptic feedback, brush orientation, different ways to change what stylus and pen you're using, it's absolutely a game changer. My favorite thing about it is just how nice it actually is to navigate around the iPad and make adjustments. It's extremely accurate for what it is. And it's been so much fun to be able to just change and manipulate things. It works exactly the way that I want it to. So then the second thing is the actual editing softwares that we'll be using to make our content with. With Lightroom even, it is so comparable to actually using the desktop app that you don't even need to think twice about it. It's a very quick learning curve when you're doing things in comparison, like adding a mask here. I have absolutely no issues just figuring out what I want to do with it. I want to darken the sky, maybe bring up some of the whites to bring up the brightness. Like, it's just all the same. And with this process being the same, you won't really have a hesitation between swapping between your MacBook Pro or whatever your main editing setup is versus going into the iPad to edit your content. The third thing is this iPad actually good for all around content creation? The iPad, in my experience, has absolutely no problems editing video or any sort of complex creative tasks, it is extremely powerful. And even in some ways when I'm masking a photo and just adding tons and tons of different elements to it, the iPad handles it better than my MacBook does at times, given my MacBook is an M1 Max chip. So we opened up Final Cut Pro here, and I've made a few different reels in Final Cut before. I've imported a clip from an older one just to mess around with it and show you what's possible. But overall, things are generally the same. You can mess around with the volume. You have an animation panel, a multicam panel, because that's even an added feature. And then all of your project media lives in the top right. While the layout is a little bit different than what we have on a MacBook Pro, it's a very intuitive setup and allows you to just move and manipulate things as you like. So I personally view it as a great solve if you're wanting to edit content on the go. You have all the tools available to you, and it's a lot more of an enjoyable experience than if you were to use a phone, for example, trying to make like massive edits on CapCut or Adobe Rush or whatever it might be, instead of having something a lot more powerful and more visual like a tool like the iPad Pro. Now, the third thing that I've been using my iPad for is actual note taking. A lot of what I do involves notes. And specifically, I use GoodNotes lately to make all of my notes. I've tried Milanote, I've tried Freeform. There are drawbacks to a lot of them for note taking specifically. And so Milanote, I've actually ended up using for a lot more pre-production and going in that direction. When you open up something like GoodNotes, you have a folder system, you have file management, you have a favorites tab, you have different ways to just keep track of things. And even just the overall organization of the app itself is so much better that I would highly recommend you mess around with things and figure out what you want to use before you start using it. And so then it comes down to if I actually use it for more heavy workflow tasks. And to answer that question, I want to go to probably the app I've used the most on the iPad, which is Canva. I'm constantly making decks, pitches, templates, write-ups, whatever it might be. And so Canva is my go-to presentation maker. I know graphic designers have an issue with Canva. Trust me, I understand. But for presentations, what are you going to do? Use Microsoft PowerPoint on your MacBook or something a lot more visual and actually like nice and enjoyable to use like Canva? I'm going to go with Canva. It's a big hack. They have great presentation templates, not sponsored either. But I'm using it on the iPad, and I have a great user experience with something like this. And that's exactly why I've swapped over to the iPad, is because when I'm on the go now and I'm traveling, I'm bringing my iPad around, not my MacBook Pro, I need something I can still be productive with. And so even if I'm making a social media strategy for a client, I can hop on in, add in my templates as I need them. And it just works so easy that I don't even need to add in the Apple keyboard. If you want to change in text, you can do whatever you want. There's more than enough screen real estate with how the iPad is actually designed that you won't have an issue sort of taking those bigger workflow management things that you might be doing and adding them into the iPad Pro itself, which for content creators is huge, because if you are traveling, if you do want to be on the go, this is something that isn't going to restrict you from putting together your pitch templates, presentations, whatever it might be that you're looking to do on the tablet itself. And so that takes us to the last part of today's video, which is, do I think your iPad Pro can actually replace a MacBook Pro? And my honest thought is yes, depending on what you're using it for. Both are exceptionally powerful. Obviously, my MacBook Pro is an M1 Max chip. I'm looking to upgrade that this year. And jumping to something like an M4 in the iPad is a big difference in a lot of the software that I'm actually using. Even in Lightroom, I notice sometimes, depending on the size of the photo that I'm editing, the iPad will work better than the MacBook does at times, especially if connected to an external display. Where the sort of limitations are in the iPad is that it still somehow doesn't feel as real as a MacBook does. And it's weird to say that, because in theory, it shouldn't have any restrictions, but even just sort of like navigating certain workflow things like hopping into meetings or jumping into Slack or whatever it might be, it still feels like a tablet. It doesn't feel like a computer. And I don't know if that's still maybe because I haven't gotten used to it, but I find at times I can get slowed down because of this. Whereas on the MacBook, it's just this comfortable thing that I'm just, I know where everything is. I know I can open up dual windows. I know I can do whatever I need to do, but you can do all of that on the iPad. You have dual window capabilities. You have a sort of different ways of organizing your workspaces on the iPad. It just feels different. And I think that's the biggest hurdle that people need to get over is like, if you're comfortable on a laptop, you're still somehow going to feel like the iPad is a learning curve, even though it actually isn't. But overall, I would highly recommend the iPad as almost a complement still to that main workspace. I don't really think the iPad can be a main workhorse for somebody. And so with that, that's kind of my thoughts on if the iPad is actually for content creators or not, or a creative individual. While the software limitations of a lot of the things aren't really there, and there's not really any sort of restrictions on apps or usage, it's still something that I think people are going to need to get used to, literally just because of the form factor of it, not really even what the capabilities of the iPad are itself. So if you did find the information in today's video useful, be sure to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought, some questions you might be wondering about the iPad, and I'm happy to make more videos about it. Just wanted to make this one as like a small check-in. So with that, thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.